highest approval rating of any segment of higher education. So you can hold your head up high. You realize you're the place where that somebody from a low-income family, somebody who maybe didn't do so well in high school and suddenly gets a second chance. A single person maybe who's raising a family is struggling and can find a place to go. The stories are just legion. I would often, when I was president at Pasadena City College, I would step out on the quad and I would look around, and I felt so proud to be president of that institution. To realize that the way in which lives were being transformed. And your special program, MESA, is giving the kind of attention to individuals who hadn't had that kind of attention before, perhaps in their life. And it's showing up in the results. You're proud of the number of transfers that go on to become scientists and engineers and mathematicians. And I'm proud of what you're doing. So in that respect, we are in the best of times. But there's another side to the story. And you know that also, when you look at the finances, we're in the worst of times. I'm reminded of the old Texan who was beginning to lose his hearing, and he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, you know, Henry, the problem is you're drinking too much. And said, I've got to warn you about that. Well, 6 months went by, a year went by, and he came back to the doctor, and his hearing was even worse. And the doctor said, now, Henry, I warned you about that. He said, how come you continue to drink? He said, well, I thought about it for a while, and frankly, I liked what I was drinking better than what I was hearing. So you may not like what you're hearing nowadays. I don't either. I wish I could give you good news. I wish I could say, you know, all of a sudden there's a revenue stream that we didn't know anything about. And so the money's going to get really good. Well, unfortunately, that's not true. We had one of the toughest years imaginable. The community college in general took an 8% decrease in funding. And categorical programs, of which you're one, took a much harder hit than that. So this is tough times. There's no question about it. Someone asked me at the table, do I expect it to be any better next year? And unfortunately, I don't. I could go at in some length and describe to you what I think is wrong as far as the budgeting of the state of California is concerned. I would start first with the fact that we're only one of 3 states that requires a 2/3 vote in order to pass a budget. And that makes it kind of tough. And I was in the legislature for 12 years, so I know what I'm talking about. We get down to the very end and suddenly there's gridlock, because all that one has to do in order to stop the budget is for 1/3 of the legislators in either house to sit on their hands, and there's no way we can get it out. So that's a tough thing to solve. So I don't see that next year things are going to get a lot better. In fact, some of the federal funding, which we are going to have this year, we won't have next year. Now, community colleges aren't taking quite as much of that federal funding, and in one way that will mean that it won't be as tough for us next year. But actually, community colleges aren't suffering any more than CSU or UC or K-12. It's not like they're picking on us. They're just picking on everybody. When you have an 18% drop in revenues in 2 years in California, something's got to give, and education is about 50% of the budget. So we've got a problem, and we'll continue to have a problem. So I guess the real question is, what are we going to do in the midst of this problem? Well, let me say that now's the time when we really will have to prioritize. It's a little bit like what happens in your own personal budget. The Chancellor's Office, for instance, we are taking a 14% cut in salary because we're taking 3 furlough days every month. Now, it's nice to have time off, but it's kind of tough when you miss that chunk of your paycheck. So there's some people that are having to really prioritize in terms of their personal budget. What's the most important thing in my budget? And well, maybe I'm not going to take that vacation to Europe this year. Maybe I'm just going to decide to stay at home, or maybe drive down to San Diego or do something of that nature. So you can see how you begin to prioritize. Well, that's what we're all going to have to do in community colleges. We're going to have to look at what we consider the most important part of our work and concentrate on that. Ron Emanuel said a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So now is a crisis time. I'm telling community colleges that, in my judgment, the thing for them to emphasize, and certainly that will fit in right well with MESA, is transfer education, career technical education, and basic skills. Now, some of those wonderful things that we do, like maybe an aerobics class at a senior center, is something we're just going to have to say, well, we don't do that anymore, folks, because we're having to do what the state of California wants us to put our emphasis on, and that's what we're going to emphasize from now on. So we've got to prioritize. You've got to really focus on what you consider to be the most important things that you're doing. Recognize what our core mission is. And if there's been a little mission creep in our community colleges, by mission creep I mean maybe we're doing this and doing that, and it wasn't too bad a thing to do, but it wasn't our central mission. So we're going to have to prioritize and recognize what it is that's the most important. And unfortunately, I know that some of you are struggling as MESA directors with your budget. I know it's painful, and you're doing wonderful things, and some of those things, it just makes you want to cry when you see those students, for instance, who walk up and try to get classes that they want to take and they can't get them. And frankly, I think the state of California is going to pay a high price for that. I don't favor what's happening to California. I think we're going to pay a very, very high price 10, 20, 30 years from now, because we need a greater educated workforce, not a less educated workforce. The studies indicate that by 2020, 39% of our workforce will need a bachelor's degree, and yet at the rate at which we're turning out bachelor's degree, only 33% will have it. So we used to poach on other states, we used to be able to get those individuals with degrees from South Dakota, where it's a little cold, and Minnesota and New York and so forth, but our real estate prices has made that more and more difficult. So we're not getting nearly the kind of degree holders from other states that we once did. Foreign countries like India and China, which they used to come over here and study, and then they'd like the U.S. so well they'd stay here. Well, they're going back to their own countries because those economies are booming. So we've got some unique problems, and we have to face up to our unique problems. It doesn't do us any good to whine and complain. All of us maybe enjoy doing that on occasions, but nobody likes to hear it, for one thing. I'm always reminded of that wonderful serenity prayer, which says, Lord, give me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So what we need to do is roll up our sleeves, recognize there's some things we can't change. We wish we'd get more money, but we can't change that. I will be as fervent in my advocacy as I can be. I certainly made a stronger case in front of the legislative committee and to the governor, and I will continue to do so, and you can continue to do so. We've had some wonderful advocacies, but the problem is the money supply is just short, and it will be short for a few years. So now's the time for us to say, okay, we don't like this, but we're going to be optimistic, and there's still students that need to be served. They're coming to our doorstep, and we can't give them quite the attention and the time that we once did, but we'll do the best we can with the resources that we've got. Because we're really engaged in quite a wonderful enterprise when you stop and think about it. There's nothing quite as rewarding as being engaged in education, because it changes lives. You've all seen people that maybe came to a community college campus with